Evan Hale had never imagined that a single morning could change the way the galaxy looked at humanity. He had prepared for this day for months, going over every protocol, memorizing the strange customs of the Zalari, and practicing polite smiles in front of the mirror until his face ached. The Zalari were a proud and ancient species, their limbs long and delicate, their translucent wings catching light in ways that seemed impossible for any creature to truly control. Evan knew one wrong move, one misstep in the complex social dance could lead to disaster. And yet, nothing in his preparation had prepared him for what actually happened. The chamber was enormous, circular, and eerily quiet. Soft golden light filtered through the walls, which shimmered with living patterns that pulsed like they were breathing. Zalari courtiers moved with precise grace, their motions synchronized in ways that seemed almost musical, and Evan felt like a clumsy human among a flock of birds. He reminded himself to stay calm, to remember the human principle that kindness and honesty often spoke louder than any formal gesture. The Queen of the Zalari sat on a throne that seemed to grow out of the chamber itself. Her wings glimmered faintly, and her eyes were large, reflecting both curiosity and caution. Evan bowed deeply, careful to keep his movements respectful, but not exaggerated, knowing that any sign of weakness could be misinterpreted. "Welcome, Representative Hale," the Queen said, her voice soft but commanding. Evan did not understand the words themselves, but the translation device implanted in his collar converted them into careful English. "We have observed your species from afar, and we wish to understand the ways of humans more closely." Evan straightened. "It is my honor to meet you, Your Majesty. Humanity wishes for friendship and understanding with the Zalari." The courtiers around them murmured quietly, their wings brushing the air in a sound that resembled rustling silk. Evan had expected the ceremony to continue with a series of formal gestures, perhaps a gift exchange, and then polite conversation. Instead, a small movement caught his attention. A tiny figure darted forward, faster than Evan could process. Before anyone could react, the child, no older than 7, with shimmering wings that mirrored her mother's, leapt forward and wrapped her arms around Evan's chest. He froze for a fraction of a second, stunned, before gently hugging her back. The chamber went completely silent. For a moment, time itself seemed to pause. The Queen's face remained unreadable, her eyes narrowing ever so slightly as if she were calculating every possible consequence of this unexpected action. The courtiers stiffened, their wings rising in what appeared to be a mixture of alarm and curiosity. Evan, realizing the tension, spoke softly. "Hello, it's nice to meet you," he said, his voice calm but unsure. The child giggled, a sound that was musical and bright, and stepped back slightly, holding his hand as though she had always known him. The translators, still processing, finally whispered a translation. The child had said something that made the room shiver in astonishment. "I know you. You feel safe." Evan blinked. "Safe?" he repeated, unsure if he had heard correctly. The Queen's eyes flickered briefly toward her daughter. "Explain!" she demanded in a tone that brooked no argument. The child, standing proudly now, gestured to Evan. "He does not frighten me." "I remember the stories my nurse told me about the humans who could care without needing control." I wanted to see if it was true. The chamber erupted in whispers. The courtiers exchanged confused glances, their wings brushing against each other nervously. Evan struggled to process the meaning behind her words. Care without control? That was precious. Human nature perhaps distilled into a single innocent interaction. The Queen's voice was measured, yet held the quiet edge of curiosity.
"You are aware of what you have done?" she asked the child.
"I am," the child replied, her tone firm. He felt safe. That is what matters. Evan swallowed hard, realizing that somehow, in one spontaneous hug, he had achieved something that no negotiation, no speech, and no careful planning could have accomplished. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing on him, yet a strange warmth filled him as well. The child's trust was absolute, uncalculated, and utterly human in its simplicity. For the next few minutes, the Queen studied him. Evan maintained his composure, though his mind raced. What did this mean for human-Exilari relations? Could a single hug really be interpreted as diplomacy? And if so, what kind of responsibility had he just assumed? Finally, the Queen nodded slowly. "It seems that your species may possess qualities we have long thought lost in the galaxy," she said. Her wings flickered slightly, a subtle sign of her own emotion, though she maintained her regal composure. "We will observe you closely, Representative Hale. You are not merely a guest here. You may have lessons to teach us that we did not expect." Evan felt a mixture of awe and relief. He had entered this chamber expecting to represent humanity's strength through careful etiquette, strategic words, and visible competence. Instead, it was human kindness, embodied in an instinctive gesture that opened a door no one anticipated. As the ceremony continued, Evan found himself walking alongside the child, her small hand occasionally brushing against his arm. She chattered in Zelari, and the translators offered fragments of her words. She was curious about everything: human gestures, facial expressions, and even the way he breathed and moved. Evan explained carefully, simplifying ideas so she could understand. She listened with rapt attention, asking questions that were surprisingly deep, revealing a mind far older than her years. The courtiers watched silently. Some of them leaned in slightly, intrigued. Others seemed wary, unsure if this behavior would be acceptable in their culture. But Evan noticed that no one dared intervene. The Queen had allowed this, and her daughter's instinctive choice had created a small pocket of trust and connection that had never existed before. Evan realized for the first time that diplomacy was not always about control or protocol. Sometimes it was about being genuine, about showing others that you could be trusted without force or obligation. The child had recognized this instantly, and in doing so, she had opened a path to understanding that words alone could not create. Hours passed in a mixture of conversation, observation, and quiet instruction. Evan found himself explaining the human way of greeting, of showing respect, of offering comfort without expectation. The child mirrored his gestures, sometimes clumsily, sometimes with uncanny precision. And each time she did, Evan felt the invisible threads of connection grow stronger.
By the time the ceremony concluded, Evan knew that this moment would be remembered in history.
Not because of treaties or political maneuvering, but because a simple act of trust, a hug, had set the stage for a relationship that could reshape the galaxy's understanding of humanity.
As he left the chamber, the child whispered in his ear, a tiny smile on her face.
"You are safe, and that is why I came to you." Evan walked out into the sunlight of the alien city, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He had entered as a representative of humanity, but he was leaving with the knowledge that humans might be valued for something far more profound than any technology, strategy, or weapon. They could be valued for their capacity to care, to trust, and to connect in ways that even the most advanced civilizations had almost forgotten. And for Evan Hale, that realization was only the beginning. After the unexpected hug, Evan found himself in a situation far beyond what any diplomat's handbook had ever prepared him for. The Solari princess, small, bright, and curious, had claimed a piece of his attention as though it had always belonged to her. The Queen, instead of punishing her child or reprimanding him, had given a subtle nod of approval. That nod, Evan realized, meant that the bridge between human and Solari was no longer formal or controlled. It was personal. Evan spent the next morning preparing for a different kind of mission. He was to stay in the palace for a period of observation, not as a guest, but as a teacher of human ways, gestures, communication, and connections that the Solari had never practiced. While the other diplomats busied themselves with treaties and speeches, Evan would teach something no textbook could describe: the human way of caring and interacting freely, without dominance, coercion, or obligation. He met the princess in the palace gardens. The gardens were vast, suspended platforms with streams of glowing water, plants that hummed softly, and flowers that opened or closed depending on the observer's mood. The princess darted toward him, wings flashing in the golden light. Her movement was graceful yet chaotic, like a comet weaving unpredictably through the sky. "Hello again," she chirped, her voice carrying the same energy as her sudden hug.
Today, we learn about humans.
Evan smiled. "Yes," he said gently. "But humans are not just about learning.
Humans are about feeling and understanding."
The princess tilted her head, her eyes wide.
Feeling?
Understanding? Can you show me? And so the lessons began. Evan started with small things, hand gestures, facial expressions, and simple acts of kindness. He demonstrated how humans greet without hierarchy, how a smile or a touch on the shoulder could convey friendship. The princess tried to imitate him, at first awkwardly. Her wings flapped uncontrollably and her small hands fumbled. But she laughed at her mistakes, a sound that filled the garden with warmth. "Humans are funny when they try something new," she said, giggling, "like when you bow, then shake hands. Why do you do both?" Evan laughed too. "It is a way to show respect and friendliness at the same time. Some things humans do are complex, even for humans themselves." She nodded seriously, then tried again. Her movements were smoother this time, and Evan could see her begin to understand. Each small success caused her to beam, and each failure was met with laughter, not frustration. Evan realized that her spirit, so open, so willing, made his lessons more than teaching. They were exploration. As the days passed, Evan introduced concepts that seemed entirely foreign to the Zalari. He showed the princess how humans share stories, how they communicate feelings through words rather than pheromones or psychic signals. He taught her about trust, about how humans sometimes relied on each other simply because they chose to, not because they were compelled by instinct or hierarchy. The princess absorbed everything. She asked questions with a sharpness that revealed a mind both young and ancient. "Why do humans smile when they are scared?" she asked one day. "Because it helps them feel safe," Evan explained. "Smiling can calm the mind, and it can show others that we are not a threat." The princess paused, then tried it herself, making a strange mixture of a smile and a worried frown. Evan could not help but laugh, and she laughed too, her wings shimmering with excitement. The palace staff began to notice. Zalari adults, initially cautious and skeptical, watched from a distance. Some were puzzled by the simplicity of what Evan was teaching, unable to grasp why humans valued connection over control. Others were intrigued, their rigid movements softening as they observed the princess practicing what she had learned. Without realizing it, Evan's lessons were spreading quietly through the palace, changing behaviors, one gesture at a time. One afternoon, Evan took the princess to the observation terraces, a platform high above the city, where they could see airships gliding between floating spires and distant planets glowing like jewels in the sky. "Humans look at the stars and wonder what others are thinking," Evan said, pointing to the nearest planet. "We try to understand, even when it is difficult. That is part of why we care for each other. We imagine what it is like to be another person." The princess blinked slowly. "Do Zalari do that?" "Sometimes," Evan admitted. "But often Zalari rely on instinct. We rely on choice." She considered this carefully. "Choice," she whispered. "I think I like that." By now, Evan had learned something himself. The princess was teaching him in return. Through her curiosity, her eagerness to understand the human way, he discovered that diplomacy was not about being cautious or perfect. It was about authenticity. Even in a species as ancient and disciplined as the Zalari, there was a place for openness, trust, and kindness. During one lesson, the princess asked him to explain games. Evan was surprised. "Games?" he repeated. "Yes," she said, eyes shining. "Humans play games. What do they do?" Evan laughed softly. Games are ways to learn, to enjoy each other's company, and sometimes to challenge ourselves. But the point is not to win. It is to participate and share. The princess's expression changed from curiosity to determination. "Show me," she demanded. Evan improvised. He taught her a simple game of imitation. He moved, and she copied. Then she moved, and he copied. Soon they were laughing, wings brushing the air, moving in ways that had nothing to do with hierarchy or competition. Others in the gardens watched, confused at first, then gradually intrigued. The room felt lighter, freer, as though an invisible tension had begun to lift. That evening, as Evan returned to his quarters, he reflected on the lessons of the day. In one brief week, he had learned more about the Zilari than he had from years of reading reports, and he suspected that they had learned far more about humans than anyone had expected. The princess, in particular, seemed to embody the possibility of change. The queen, meanwhile, observed from her private chambers. She had remained quiet throughout the lessons, rarely interfering. Yet Evan knew she was calculating every detail, every subtle shift in behavior. She was not a leader who acted on impulse, but even she could not hide a spark of interest, a recognition that something unique had begun. On the 5th day, the princess came running to Evan with a small, shimmering object in her hand. "Look! I made this for you!" she exclaimed. It was a simple sculpture, a twisting shape of glowing material, delicate yet strong. "It is like humans make, yes? You can touch it, and it does not break easily." Evan took it carefully, marveling at the craftsmanship.
"It is beautiful," he said sincerely. "You made it yourself?" "Yes!"
"With my hands and my thinking. I wanted you to see that humans can help others create, and that we can make things that feel safe and happy." Evan felt the warmth spread through him. That small gift, so simple and innocent, was worth more than any official accolade or diplomatic success. It symbolized trust, creativity, and the human ability to inspire confidence and joy, even across species. As night fell over the palace, the lights of the city sparkling like stars below them, Evan realized something profound. Humanity's strength was not just in technology, or numbers, or strategy. It was in this: the ability to connect, to care, to inspire others to trust and explore without fear. And here, with the Zilari princess, he saw that power in action. He did not know what the queen's next move would be, or how other Zilari leaders might respond. But he understood that a bridge had been built, a bridge made not of treaties or rules, but of understanding, laughter, and trust. And for the first time in his life, Evan felt that the future of humanity might be brighter than he had ever dared to imagine. As he prepared for sleep that night, the princess quietly entered his room, holding a small flower from the gardens. She placed it on his desk. "For you," she said simply, "because humans are special. You help me feel something I did not know I could feel." Evan smiled, feeling the truth of her words more deeply than any speech, any report, or any ceremony could convey. He realized the galaxy was not just observing humanity, they were learning from it in ways that no one could have predicted. And somewhere deep in the palace, the queen watched from her chambers, her expression unreadable. Yet Evan felt that her mind was turning, imagining the possibilities of this new connection, and perhaps beginning to see that humans could teach the galaxy lessons that even the most ancient civilizations had forgotten. Evan woke early that morning, as he had every day since the princess had first hugged him. The palace was quiet, save for the soft hum of the gardens and the distant flutter of Zilari wings. But today felt different. There was a sense of anticipation in the air, as if the city itself held its breath. The princess had insisted that they meet outside the usual gardens, near the central terrace that overlooked the entire floating city. When Evan arrived, she was already there, perched on the edge of the terrace with her legs dangling over the side, wings catching the rising sun. "Today," she said, her eyes bright with excitement, We will show the others. Evan frowned slightly, uncertain what she meant.
Show the others what?
Her wings fluttered in impatience.
What I have learned from you? What humans do?
Everyone says humans are strange, but I want to show them why humans are special. Evan's heart skipped a beat. This was a bold move. The Zalari were cautious creatures bound by rules and centuries of tradition. To invite their attention directly could be dangerous if done incorrectly. But the princess's confidence was contagious, and Evan knew he could not refuse.
All right, he said finally. Let's do it together.
The princess nodded eagerly. They began with something simple: gestures. Evan demonstrated how humans used posture, expression, and movement to communicate feelings without words. The princess copied him carefully, then improvised, adding her own flourishes. Some Zalari noticed from a distance. At first, they observed quietly, uncertain whether to intervene, but curiosity was stronger than caution. Soon, a small group had gathered around the terrace, wings brushing lightly against each other as they whispered in excitement. Evan continued. He taught the princess a few games that humans used to build trust. One was a simple imitation game: move, follow, copy, and another was a cooperative puzzle, requiring the players to work together to solve it. The princess led the way, guiding the hesitant adults through the motions. Their initial stiffness gave way to laughter, awkward gestures, and a surprising joy that spread quickly through the gathering. It is
Different,
one of the courtiers whispered to another.
but it feels good.
Evan smiled. That was exactly what he wanted them to feel. Not fear, not obligation, not control, but connection. By midday, the terrace was full of Zalari, ranging from curious children to stern adults. Evan and the princess moved among them, teaching, demonstrating, and encouraging. Small breakthroughs happened everywhere. A young Zalari child smiled for the first time without any prompting from their elders. A stern counselor tried the cooperative puzzle and laughed when the princess celebrated his success. Even the queen appeared, standing at the edge of the terrace observing silently. Her wings were folded neatly, but Evan could sense her attention focused entirely on the interactions below. He had no doubt she was measuring the effects of every gesture, every laugh, every tiny moment of trust being shared. As the sun reached its highest point, Evan called a pause. He turned to the princess.
You've done something remarkable today, he said.
You've shown them that humans care, and that caring is not weakness. It is strength. The princess beamed.
It feels nice, she admitted. I never knew people could feel this way. Evan realized then that this was more than a lesson in human behavior.
It was a cultural awakening. The Zalari had lived for centuries in a society structured by instinct, hierarchy, and tradition. They had never considered that trust and choice could be taught, practiced, and celebrated openly. Humans had come, not with weapons or demands, but with gestures and understanding, and the effect was profound. Later that afternoon, the queen summoned Evan to her chambers. He entered carefully, bowing as always, though he could feel the weight of her scrutiny. "Representative Hale," she said, her voice steady, "you have done something unexpected." Evan inclined his head respectfully. "I have tried to share what humans do best, Your Majesty." The queen's eyes softened slightly. "You have shown them empathy, choice, and trust. It is remarkable. And yet, it is also dangerous. A society that relies on instinct can be disrupted by such lessons. They may not understand the balance at first." Evan nodded.
That is true.
But humans also believe that understanding and cooperation are worth the risk. Sometimes, change begins with small acts, not decrees or rules. The queen considered this. "Perhaps your species has value beyond what I imagined. But be careful. Not all Zalari may accept this easily."
I will be careful, Evan promised. But I also believe they will follow the princess.
She is brave, curious, and willing to try new things. She is the key to helping them see. The Queen's gaze lingered on him. You may be right, she said finally. Observe closely. Learn from her as much as you teach her. And remember, one small spark can ignite a great change or a great mistake. Evan left the chambers with a renewed sense of purpose. He had always known that humans were different, but seeing the Zalari respond to simple gestures of trust and care made him realize just how powerful human empathy could be.
Over the next several days, Evan and the princess continued their lessons, expanding their reach.
They introduced storytelling, a human tradition that allowed the Zalari to share experiences and emotions verbally. At first, the concept was strange. Zalari were accustomed to communicating through subtle movements, pheromones, and psychic signals. Words were inefficient, even awkward. But as Evan read simple human tales and encouraged the princess to retell them in her own words, the Zalari began to understand. They laughed at the funny parts, paused to reflect on moments of sadness, and shared their own experiences in new ways. One day, Evan guided a group of Zalari through an exercise in problem-solving, using the principle of cooperation rather than competition. They faced a complex puzzle designed to require everyone's input. At first, tempers flared and instincts pushed some to dominate. But the princess reminded them gently, work together. Listen. Trust. Slowly, the group began to change. Wings brushed lightly instead of striking. Voices softened instead of rising in anger. And finally, the puzzle was solved, not by the strongest, but by the team.
Evan watched in quiet satisfaction.
This was the essence of what he had come to teach. Humans thrived not through force but through collaboration, empathy, and shared understanding. Even the palace staff, initially skeptical, began to adopt these human practices in small ways. Guards offered a nod of encouragement rather than a glare. Courtiers paused to listen rather than immediately command. Children laughed more freely. The changes were subtle but unmistakable, and Evan could feel that the seeds of something extraordinary had been planted. As evening fell one day, the princess pulled Evan aside. I want to do more, she said, eyes shining.
I want to teach them to care for each other like humans do, not just follow rules. Will you help me? Evan smiled warmly.
Yes, he said. And together, we will see how far it can go. The queen, watching silently from her chambers, made a rare gesture. She allowed the princess more freedom to lead these lessons. It was a bold move, even for a ruler so wise and patient. But something in the child's confidence, and in Evan's guidance, suggested that the Zalari were ready for change, and that humanity's unique gifts might be the catalyst. By the end of the week, the terrace had become a hub of activity. Zalari adults and children alike participated in games, storytelling, and exercises in empathy. Laughter and curiosity replaced stiffness and caution. And through it all, the princess shone, her small hands guiding, encouraging, and demonstrating the lessons Evan had taught her. Evan realized that the work was far from finished. The Zalari still had much to learn, and some would resist. But the foundations had been laid. One hug, one lesson, one shared laugh had begun a transformation that could ripple through their entire civilization. And that, he understood, was the true power of humanity: to inspire, to connect, and to teach, not through force, but through care. That night, as he looked out over the city from his window, Evan reflected on everything that had happened.
The princess had grown, the Zalari had begun to change, and he had witnessed something extraordinary.
The galaxy was vast, full of challenges and dangers, but he felt a quiet hope. Perhaps humans could not only survive among the stars, they could help others grow, change, and thrive as well. And as he drifted to sleep, he knew that tomorrow would bring new lessons, new challenges, and new opportunities to show that humanity's strength was not in weapons or strategy, but in the simple, powerful act of care.